Picture this. You are standing in a dark chamber lit by torches under the Egyptian desert. The year is 2200 BC. You are a young soldier called at midnight with strange orders. Bring honey, 10 jars of it. Tell no one where you are going. Now you watch as servants pour that honey over a naked boy standing on a stone platform. The honey covers every inch of his shaking body until he shines gold in the flickering torchlight. The boy has been trained not to talk, not to cry, not to move. But his eyes are different. His eyes are screaming. You hear buzzing, thousands of wings. Clay jars around the room begin to shake hard. Inside those jars are 3 kinds of creatures. Scarab beetles that have been starved for 5 days. Fire ants taken from Nubian valleys and fed with blood. Wasps raised only for anger and kept restless with smoke. But there is a 4th jar in the corner, and what is inside that one will haunt Egyptian dreams for the next 4,000 years. The pharaoh enters. He is 96 years old, though some say 100. He has ruled Egypt for 90 years, since he was just 6. He has outlived 8 generations of his own family. His name is Pepi II, and what happens next will be wiped from Egyptian records, but whispered by priests, written down by outsiders, and found in mass graves that still make archaeologists leave their work forever. With one small move of his old hand, the servants release the insects. The beetles arrive first, a moving carpet of black shells crawling over the honey-covered skin. Each beetle begins to bite, their jaws made to tear through hides much tougher than human flesh. The boy tries not to move, but his muscles betray him, twitching and jerking as dozens of beetles bite at once. Then come the ants, rivers of fire that follow the honey trails. Each ant injects venom that burns exactly as their name suggests. By the time the wasps come, the boy's face has already started to swell. But the wasps make sure that in minutes, his face is ruined, twisted into a mask of pain that barely looks human. The screams bouncing off these carefully built walls are not only from pain, they are from knowing this is entertainment, that his pain is a show, that the old pharaoh on his golden throne is watching not in horror, but in excitement, sometimes shouting out changes like a director fixing a play. More honey on the feet, release another wave of ants, let the beetles focus on the soft spots. This will last 3 hours. The boy will survive, barely. He will be carried to recovery rooms where skilled doctors will keep him alive, not out of kindness, but for cost. He is too expensive to replace. He will heal slowly, fed special food to bring back his strength, treated with creams to hide scars, and then, when he is just strong enough, it will happen again and again, until he grows too old for the pharaoh's taste or dies from too much damage. This boy is one of around 50,000 children who vanish into Pepi's chambers over his 94-year rule. But before I tell you how a 6-year-old became history's biggest predator, before I explain how a whole empire reshaped itself to serve one man's hunger, you need to know something that historians rarely say. Pepi II was not born evil. He was shaped, molded, changed by a storm of unlimited power, childhood pain, and 9 decades of never facing punishment. What you are about to hear is not just old history. It is a pattern that repeats whenever humans hold absolute power for too long. This is the story of how a child became a god, how a god became a monster, and how 50,000 children broke the greatest empire on earth with their silence. But before going deeper into the darkest parts of ancient life, if you enjoy hidden truths of history, hit that like button and subscribe for more videos like this. And please comment below to tell me where you are watching from. Every monster has a beginning. For Pepi II, it started in 2278 BC with blood, betrayal, and a crowning that broke a 6-year-old mind into something strange. His father, Pepi I, died from what meters called a scorpion sting. Strange how that scorpion got past 14 guards, walked through 4 locked doors, avoided 2 food tasters sleeping in the side room, and gave a deadly sting that left wounds looking exactly like a bronze dagger's cut. Even stranger was how the crown prince, Pepi's older brother, died the same week from river fever.
even though he had been in the deep desert for 3 months, far away from water. That left little Neferkare, called Pepu, the fourth son no one thought would matter, a quiet boy who played with wooden soldiers and followed his mother around the women's area, a child so far from the throne that no one bothered to teach him power. Within 7 days, he would be covered in blood, crowned as a god, and find something dark inside himself that would grow for the next 9 decades. The crowning of a pharaoh was meant to turn man into God, but what happens when you do this ritual on a mind too young to tell the difference between symbol and real? What happens when a 6-year-old truly thinks he has become a god? The ceremony began at sunrise. The priest stripped the boy naked before 3,000 watching nobles. A white bull raised only for this day was led into the hall. Its throat was cut so clean that the blood shot straight into a golden bowl big enough to bathe in. The bull's eyes were still blinking when they lifted the child and dipped him into its blood. He was held under until his lungs burned, until his little body kicked in panic, until the last second before drowning. Then they pulled him up, gasping and red, expecting the normal reaction of a scared 6-year-old. Tears, screaming, calling for his mother. Instead, little Pepu laughed, not nervous, not crazy, but the happy giggle of a boy who thought he had found something fun. He looked at his blood-covered hands with wonder, licked his fingers to taste it, then asked the priests if he could go under again. The high priest later wrote in his private notes that in 40 years of doing these ceremonies, he had never felt such deep fear as when that boy smiled with a face dripping in blood. But the ritual was only starting. Now came the test to prove he had the right to rule, the power over death itself. A prisoner was brought forward, some petty thief who had expected to be killed, but not like this. He was forced to kneel before the blood-soaked child. The priests gave Pepu a ceremonial bronze blade, a weapon made for grown men that the boy could hardly lift. His job was simple: cut off the head, prove the god's power flows through you. The first strike missed fully. The blade's weight pulled the boy down and he fell forward into the pool of blood. The court went silent. Would he cry? Would this break the illusion? Would he prove to be just a scared child after all?
Pepe stood up slowly, looking at the blade with the focus of a student learning to write. He changed his grip, moved his feet differently, and tried again. The second strike hit the prisoner's shoulder, cutting it open and spraying blood on the nobles in the front row. The third strike broke teeth. The fourth cut the throat, but did not cut through the spine. Any other child would have stopped when the prisoner stopped moving. But Pepe kept going, strike after strike, learning with every swing, changing his style based on what worked and what failed. It took 11 blows before the head finally came off. By then, the prisoner had been dead for minutes, but the child pharaoh did not stop until the job was finished. Then came the moment that showed what Pepe would become. He picked up the cut-off head, looked into the dead eyes, and whispered something. When asked what he had said, the young pharaoh gave words that would define his whole rule. He said he had asked the head what death tasted like, and though it gave no answer, he thought he understood anyway. Death, he said, tasted like power. A 6-year-old child, covered in blood, holding a head, talking about the flavor of death. This was not trauma breaking him. This was discovery, the moment when Pepe realized what he would spend the next 94 years chasing. The crowning was not finished. 23 women stood before the new pharaoh, his father's other wives, who tradition said must follow the dead king into the afterlife. The youngest was 14, married only months earlier. The oldest was 32, mother of 3 of Pepe's half-brothers and sisters. Custom called for poisoned wine. Quick, clean, ceremonial. But the 6-year-old God King had been changed by blood and violence. He wanted to see death, to watch it slowly enough to study every detail. He ordered the women strangled with silk ropes, but slowly, with breaks so they could recover before the pressure came again. He sat on a throne so large his feet dangled like the child he was, but his eyes
looked like something else. For 4 hours, he watched 23 women die. He never looked away. He sometimes told the men to change their grip, to press harder or softer, to try from a new angle. He was not only watching, he was learning, marking the exact moment when panic turned into surrender, when the body stopped fighting, when the eyes lost their light. Then came their children, 41 half-brothers and sisters who could one day challenge his crown. The boys were strangled like their mothers. But for the girls, Pepi created something new. They had to choose while watching their families die, serve him forever or die with their mothers. They had to decide in that moment of grief and fear. 6 chose to live. They would spend years wishing they had not. One girl would survive long enough to tell the story years later. She said that even when Pepi was 6, he was obsessed with fear. He kept them in a special part of the palace, coming in at random times just to watch them. He wanted to see how fear changed their breathing, their steps, even their sleep. He was most interested in the moment when fear grew so strong that the mind simply shut down. He called it the divine silence.
By age 8, Pepi learned that some poisons caused paralysis without death. He spent months mixing different poisons, noting which ones kept victims awake but unable to move. He treated this as seriously as reading hieroglyphs. His tutors had to help him write scrolls with detailed notes on every type of suffering. At age 9, he made a discovery that would shape his reign. Pain, he realized, was not one thing, but many. Like wine could be sweet or bitter, suffering came in flavors. The pain of burning was not the same as cutting, which was not the same as poison, which was not the same as insects. He began listing each type of pain like a scholar, calling it his great work, a study of every kind of human suffering. The event that showed how deep this obsession had grown happened when he was 10, during morning court, with the whole government waiting. A cat caught a bird in the throne room. The bird's wing broke, but it was still alive, fluttering while the cat played with it. There were serious matters to discuss. A small famine was hitting Upper Egypt. Ambassadors were waiting with tribute. Military officers brought warnings about raiders at the borders. Pepi stopped everything to watch. For 1 hour, the most powerful empire in the world waited while a child god stared at nature's cruelty. When a courtier softly suggested moving forward with state issues, Pepi had him beaten until he passed out. The pharaoh's focus was holy. To interrupt it was a crime. When the bird finally died, Pepi called the cat to him, fed it from his own plate, and declared it sacred. Any cat that killed slowly, he said, was holy. They were teaching the truth. He had learned that death was not a single moment, but a process, and that process was the most important thing in life. At 11, Pepi wrote a letter that shows clearly how he was turning from disturbed child into a cold predator. His general Hark was returning from Nubia with gifts, including a pygmy dancer. Most of the letter read like childish excitement over a rare toy, but the full message revealed something darker. Pepi ordered the dwarf be checked 10 times every night. Every 48 minutes, someone had to prove he was alive and unharmed. If the dwarf died before reaching Memphis, every sailor's children would be fed to crocodiles while their fathers watched. If he escaped, every soldier would be impaled. If he arrived hurt, Hark himself would suffer the same injuries 10 times worse. But the most revealing part was the note at the end, often left out of translations. Pepi asked Hark to also bring a normal child of the same weight as the dwarf. He wanted to compare them to see if size changed how long someone could live without water, how they felt pain, if their screams sounded different. The dwarf was not for fun. He was for testing. By 16, watching was not enough. Pepi needed to take part. The change from observer to actor began with the children of his servants. Palace workers had to bring their sons for blessings by the god king. These blessings happened in private rooms. The children went in whole. They came out damaged. Some never came out at all.
The first case the records could not fully hide happened when Pepe was 24. A noble son, 13 years old, had been invited to join the palace musicians. 3 days later, his body was returned so ruined that the embalmer refused to prepare it for burial, saying his life force had been destroyed beyond repair. The family asked for justice.
They were rich, powerful, impossible to silence. So Pepe did something clever and cruel. He declared their son had been chosen for sacred change. His pain had opened doors to holy knowledge. The family should feel proud. Then he invited them to the palace to receive payment. They were never seen again. This was when Pepe created the job that would turn his obsessions into a system, the overseer of royal entertainments. On paper, it sounded ceremonial. In truth, it was an operation that would grow to employ almost 1,000 people across Egypt. The first overseer was a man named Keti, chosen because he had no conscience. Within months, he built a network of scouts, transporters, guards, doctors, and disposers. He wrote detailed rules for who to take. Boys between 8 and 14, exact heights, weights, skin colors, even the sound of their voices mattered. Pepe liked high voices because his old ears could hear them better when they screamed. The honey rituals began when Pepe was 52, in his 46th year as king. By then, single victims no longer pleased him. He wanted show. He wanted ceremony. He wanted what he called symphonies of sensation. The idea came from watching warehouse workers spill honey and get swarmed by insects. Pepe saw a young worker covered in biting ants and felt what witnesses called a holy vision. Here was pain that came from nature itself, pain that could be blamed on sacred creatures, torture that looked like godly punishment. The first honey chamber was small. A single room under the palace, walls sealed with tar to keep in sound, drains in the floor for fluids. But simple was never enough for Pepe. Within a year, it had grown into a maze of 9 linked chambers, each with a purpose. The cleaning chamber, where boys were washed and oiled. The honey room for the main ritual. The beetle pit, where victims were dropped into thousands of flesh-eating scarabs. The snake chamber for those who had survived insects. The water room with pools holding things that should not exist. The fire chamber where controlled burning gave special kinds of pain. The recovery room where boys were kept alive for reuse. The disposal chamber, which needs no detail. And at the center, the viewing platform, where Pepe could watch it all. The honey itself became exact science. Pure honey brought insects, but not enough. On testing on early victims, palace torturers found the perfect mix. Honey, blended with human spit, changed its smell and made insects go wild. Tears added salts some insects craved. Blood pulled in the ones that wanted protein. But the strongest lure was fear itself. The chemicals released by terrified children mixed into honey created an irresistible draw for biting insects. The insects, too, were bred with care. Scarabs fed only raw meat until they linked flesh with food. Fire ants chosen for the strongest venom and rage. Wasps kept angry with smoke and shaking. Each species tested to learn the best starving time for the worst attacks. A normal session followed strict rules. The chosen boy was brought in at sunset, when certain insects were most active. He was stripped, checked for injuries that might kill him too soon, then given a mix of lotus wine and herbs. Not to kill pain, but to keep him awake. Awareness was required. The whole point was that he knew what was happening. The boy was strapped on a stone platform with drains carved in. Leather ties at hands and feet, tight enough to stop escape, loose enough so he could twist and struggle while Pepe watched.
Then came the honey. Servants used brushes made from palm leaves, spreading it over every inch of skin. Special focus on the sensitive spots, the places that caused the strongest reactions. The insects were let out in waves. First, the beetles, 50 to 100, which ate the honey while also biting flesh. The boys started thrashing as dozens of jaws cut into them at once. Then came the ants, hundreds of them, each bite leaving burning paths across the honey-soaked body.
Last were the wasps, their stings making instant swelling that closed eyes, sealed mouths, and twisted faces into masks of suffering. Pepe watched from his platform, sometimes giving orders. More honey on the feet for beetles. Add more ants, but only on one side for uneven pain. Remove the wasps, but let the beetles keep working. He ran each session like a play he directed, changing the pain for maximum effect. Sessions could last 3 hours or more, with pauses and restarts to stop death from shock. Boys who lived through it were taken to recovery rooms, healed just enough for another round. Some went through this many times, over months, before dying or growing out of Pepi's interest. By the 70th year of his rule, when Pepi was 76 years old, Egypt had fully rebuilt itself around one man's desires. This was not corruption of an old system. This was the invention of a new machine of horror. Think about the economy. Egypt made more honey in Pepi's last 20 years than in the 100 years before. Whole regions that should have grown food were instead growing flowers for bees. This during a time when the Nile floods were failing. While Egypt starved, its fields bloomed with flowers to make honey for pain. The human network was massive. The overseer of royal entertainments commanded 4 regional chiefs. Each chief managed 10 provincial officers. Each officer led 5 village scouts. That was 200 men whose only duty was finding boys. Behind them worked hundreds more. Boat makers who built ships with hidden spaces for transport. Metal workers who built restraints sized for children. Potters who made special jars for insects. Farmers who bred chosen insect types. Merchants who brought in rare creatures from faraway lands. The selection rules became insane. Records from that time list 47 different body requirements. Height measured within 2 fingers. Weight exact to half a deben. Skin shade compared to color charts painted on pottery. Even the pitch of their screams was tested, with preference for tones Pepi's old ears could still hear.
Villages developed desperate tricks to protect their children. Some claimed sicknesses that only struck boys of the right age. Others told stories of mass drownings, raids by desert tribes, anything to explain why their sons were missing. The governor of Abydos said all the boys in his land had been cursed with ugliness by an angry god. The governor of Hyrampus swore floods had washed away 3 whole villages. The governor of Edfu reported jackals had started eating children and had taken them all. These lies never worked. The governors were killed, their families enslaved, and their replacements sent double the normal number of boys to prove they were loyal. The warning was clear: send children or become victims yourselves. Some areas tried other ways. Rich families sent their sons to Nubia or Libya, pretending they had died of fever. Poor families had fewer choices. Some burned their sons' faces with hot metal. Others broke bones to cause deformities. Some gave their boys drinks that made them look sick for a short time. The lucky ones made their sons unsuitable. The unlucky ones had their damaged children taken anyway, with their scars only adding more interest to Pepe's shows. The impact was beyond belief. Some regions lost 70% of their young boys over 30 years, not from war, which leaves battle wounds, not from illness, which affects all ages. These boys simply disappeared. Villages near Memphis, closest to the palace and most often taken from, suffered the worst. Burial records show almost no boy children dying from natural causes. Either they had become immune to every childhood disease, which is impossible, or they were dying somewhere else, somewhere their families could not bury them. Resistance groups appeared, brave but doomed. Fathers who had lost sons started attacking the convoys carrying boys. They called themselves the Fathers of the Lost. For 6 months, they freed dozens of children and killed several scouts. Pepe's answer was fast and terrible. Every male in families linked to the resistance, from newborn babies to old men, was brought to Memphis and put through the honey rituals. They were kept alive for days, their pain stretched out with medical help, while their families were forced to watch. One tale kept alive in Nubian stories tells of a village that chose death together rather than give up their sons. When scouts arrived, they found 800 bodies in the square. Every family had drunk poison so they would not see their boys taken. The scouts gathered the bodies of the boys anyway. Pepe, furious at being denied living victims, ordered the corpses covered in honey and displayed in the palace courtyard. By the 80th year of Pepe's rule, Egypt was not just dying inside, it was hated by the outside world. Civilizations that had traded with it for thousands of years now turned away. A Sumerian tablet from this time gave merchant rules showing the disgust. Any trader who went into Egypt would be called unclean and banned from temples for a year. Any goods from Egypt would be burned with no refund. The tablet says Egypt had become the land where children enter palaces and never leave, where the pharaoh eats innocents like a lion eats gazelles. Nubia, which had sent gold to Egypt for centuries, not only stopped, but built defenses to block Egyptian raids for children. When an Egyptian army tried to cross, they found empty villages, the children hidden in desert camps. A Nubian carving from that time reads that the monster of Memphis could starve without southern gold and southern children. Even the sea peoples, raiders who feared nothing, avoided Egypt's waters. A tablet from Crete said Egyptian ports were cursed by gods who had turned away from the land where evil ruled from a throne built on murdered children. Merchants would sail hundreds of miles around Egypt rather than risk touching its evil.
The collapse of trade caused chain failures. Egypt could not bring in tin for bronze. Cedar from Lebanon for building stopped coming. Incense from Punt, needed for temple rituals, vanished. The loss of trade made the honey farming crisis even worse. Egypt was starving and isolated, dying and hated. Inside Egypt, even loyal supporters walked away. The powerful priests of Ammon at Thebes, who had backed the throne for centuries, began cutting ties with Memphis. Temple carvings from this time never named Pepi, only writing the distant throne or the ancient one. Some temples claimed poverty when asked to give supplies. Others closed their gates and ignored the capital. The army, once Egypt's pride, fell apart. Young men refused to join, afraid they would be forced to help catch children. Officers ran away rather than lead raids. Whole groups of soldiers abandoned posts and chose life as desert thieves over serving Pepi. By year 85, Egypt had no real army except the palace guard, and even they started slipping away in the night. As Pepi entered his 90s, his hunger had not faded. It had twisted into something even worse. The honey rituals that once amused him for weeks now bored him within hours. He needed more victims, more variety, more pain to feel anything after 9 decades of unchecked power. The palace expanded into a factory of horror. Where once there were 9 chambers, now there were 27. Many sessions ran at the same time. One boy suffered the honey ritual, another faced snakes, a third was in the beetle pit, a fourth in rooms that Egyptian records would not describe, even in secret. Pepi, now 96 and barely able to walk, was carried on a golden chair from chamber to chamber, watching a few minutes in each before moving on. The screams from every room mixed together, creating what one escaped servant called a symphony of the damned, echoing through the palace even though the walls were built thick to hide sound. But the system was collapsing. Provinces had no more boys. Villages were empty. Even the palace guards now had to raid towns with weapons to find victims. The act of calling it divine choice was dropped. It was now just open hunting. Soldiers stormed villages at dawn, taking every boy old enough to walk but too young to grow a beard, killing fathers who defended them, burning houses of families who hid them. When they left, 43 boys were in chains and 17 men were dead. Even inside the palace, the system was falling apart. Servants ran away rather than help. Guards deserted rather than raid. Officials burned records rather than write them. The machine of hunting and pain that had lasted for decades was breaking just as its maker reached his darkest point. The last session recorded by a palace guard who escaped right after described something so terrible that even Greek writers, who told the story centuries later, would not give details.
They said only that it involved 40 boys and insects bred to
impossible size and substances that should never touch human skin. It lasted from sunset to sunrise. No one survived. And through all of it, the 96-year-old pharaoh smiled. 3 days later, Pepi II died in his sleep, holding a piece of honeycomb, his mouth twisted in what servants called an expression of endless hunger. He had ruled for 94 years. He had outlived 8 generations of his own family. He had taken around 50,000 boys, and he had never, not once, been punished. The moment Pepi died, Egypt died with him. Not as a figure of speech, but for real. The instant his death was known, the palace exploded into chaos. But there was no mourning. Instead, everyone rushed to destroy evidence. Documents were burned in huge numbers. Not ceremonial fires, but panicked destruction. Servants threw piles of papyrus into flames that burned for days. Carvings on stone were chiseled away, even if it meant tearing down whole walls. The honey chambers were filled with rocks and sealed with blocks so heavy they could never be opened without breaking everything inside. The boys still trapped in palace dorms were a problem. Freeing them would mean admitting they were real, so they were sealed inside and left to die. Hundreds of children, already broken from endless pain, slowly starved in darkness because the truth of them was considered worse than their deaths. Pepi's heir, Marinori II, ruled less than a year. His only real act was cleaning away his father's crimes. Every record of procurement was destroyed. Every official who had taken part was either killed or ran away. Every trace of the honey chambers was buried or burned. Even Pepi's mummy was ruined on purpose. The priests preparing it for the afterlife made sure he would suffer instead. They removed organs that should have been saved, used salts that would rot instead of preserve, wrapped the body backwards. They stuffed his stomach with live insects so they would eat the corpse from the inside. It was not mummification, it was revenge after death. The pyramid built for Pepi was designed to fail. Cheap limestone, weak mortar, beams placed so they would collapse. Within a century, the roof fell in on the coffin, crushing both it and the body. The builders knew what they were doing. They wanted Pepi's body destroyed by his own tomb. Egypt itself fell apart instantly. The United Kingdom of 800 years broke into rival regions within months. Central rule was gone. The irrigation systems that fed Egypt broke down without care. Trade routes moved away forever. The knowledge of centuries scattered as scribes fled. Population recovery took centuries. Entire regions had no young men left. This meant not just missing people, but missing families, missing bloodlines, missing futures. Some places never regained their numbers. The trauma lived on in memory, a fear so deep it shaped politics for 1,000 years.
And what happened in Egypt was not unique. It was just the biggest, clearest example of a pattern that repeats whenever total power mixes with twisted desire and endless time. The Roman Emperor Tiberius hid on Capri with young boys he trained as little fish, swimming naked in his pools, taught to nibble at him while he bathed. His reign lasted 23 years. Pepi ruled 94. Gilles de Rais, the French noble who fought beside Joan of Arc, tortured and killed between 80 and 200 children. He lasted 8 years before capture. Pepi lasted 9 decades untouched. Countess Elizabeth Bathory is said to have bathed in the blood of virgins to stay young. Historians argue the numbers, between 30 and 600. Pepi's victims were tens of thousands, and no one doubts it. What makes Pepi different is not what he did, but how far he took it. He turned child torture into state business. He made procurement into paperwork. He built a machine of pain that would not be seen again until the 20th century, and even then, not so openly for one man's pleasure. The psychology is always the same. It starts with power gained too young or too fully. Normal empathy never grows. Other people become toys, objects, ways to pass time, not living souls. Then comes tolerance. Like any addiction, more is needed each time to feel the same. What starts as curiosity becomes obsession. What begins as a single act becomes a system. Evil builds an infrastructure around desire, making horror routine through rules and repetition. The helpers follow the same steps. First, they excuse it. It is the right of kings. It keeps order.
It is not as bad as stories say. Then they get involved with small acts, ignoring one crime, helping with one child, writing one false report. Each small step makes the next easier until they are trapped inside the machine. The victims are always the weak ones, the poor, the voiceless, children, chosen because no one will fight for them, because their vanishing will not be questioned. In Pepe's case, he had the power to turn their pain into religion, to make horror look like holy ritual. We like to say these are old horrors, far from today. We are wrong. The pattern Pepe set, the taking and using of the weak by the powerful, still happens in new forms. The private jets to private islands, the disappearances no one explains, the rich who never seem to face law, the walls that protect them, the victims who are not believed, the evidence sealed or burned, the investigations that stop suddenly, the guilty who die in bed, secrets still hidden. What Pepe proved is that with enough power and time, any horror can become normal. His nobles accepted the honey chambers as holy ritual. His priests blessed the taking of children as sacred duty. His people gave up their sons as if it were religion. A whole nation reshaped itself around one man's appetite because he was called a god. Modern predators may not call themselves god kings, but their wealth is like divine power. They have friends who protect them better than any palace guard. They have systems that bring them victims as efficiently as any Egyptian overseer. And they have something Pepi never had, the power to act worldwide, to move across borders, to hide behind companies and charities. The tools have changed, but the pattern has not. The slow acceptance of the unacceptable, the structures built to make it easier, the official silence that keeps it alive, the victims who vanish into modern chambers that may not use honey and insects, but destroy in other ways. Go back now to that dark, torchlit chamber where you stand as a soldier watching a honey-covered boy being eaten alive by insects. You want to run, but you can't. You want to help, but you dare not. You are trapped in a system that has made horror normal, that has turned suffering into ritual, that has made children's screams sound like background noise. That boy died 4,200 years ago. We do not know his name, his village, his mother's lullabies, his favorite games. We only know he lived because his bones were found in a mass grave with hundreds more, all showing the same injuries, all children, all forgotten, except as numbers proving organized evil. Multiply him by 50,000. 50,000 boys who had names whispered by their mothers when they were born. 50,000 futures erased for one old man's pleasure. 50,000 families destroyed, villages broken, bloodlines ended. Each one thought they were nothing, would be forgotten. In one sense, they were right. They left no statues, no carvings, no graves with names. They exist only as shadows and records, small skeletons in pits that even now are left untouched. Their names are gone forever. But in another sense, they achieved what Pepi never could. They ended the greatest empire on earth. Their absence tore a hole that Egypt never healed. Their pain finished the old kingdom more completely than any war or disaster. They conquered by being destroyed. Pepi died near 100, at peace, still believing he was divine. He faced no justice, never felt the fear he caused. His pyramid still stands, broken, but there. His name is written in every Egyptian timeline. He is remembered, studied, taught. But his victims want something stronger than memory. They want truth. Their bones speak louder than any monument. Their silence is louder than any song. Their lost futures are harsher judges than any god. They are history's loudest silence, screaming across 4,000 years that unchecked power creates unlimited horror, that humans with absolute rule become absolute monsters, that the cost of one man's hunger can be the death of a whole civilization. Travelers to Saqqara can still see Pepi's pyramid from far away, a crumbling pile of stone once reaching for heaven. Guards will say it is closed for repairs. It has been closed for 40 years. It will stay closed because some doors must not be opened. Some truths are too heavy for tourists. The honey sellers of Cairo still offer jars of golden sweetness. Tourists buy them without knowing the history. Some old Egyptian families with bloodlines stretching back millennia still refuse to eat honey. They cannot explain why. It is just tradition. Do not eat honey. Do not ask. Remember only that sweetness can hide horror, that golden beauty can bring pain, that some things must never be consumed. Somewhere under Egyptian sand, in chambers never to be opened, evidence waits. More bones of children, more jars with honey mixed with human remains, more proof of evil that lasted longer than most nations. The full truth may never be known. Some doors stay sealed, not to honor the dead, but to hide what the living might learn about human cruelty. The 12-year-old boy covered in honey at the start of our story died in agony 4,200 years ago. But his death still speaks across time as a warning. This is what happens when power has no limits. This is what humans do when they face no punishment. This is why we must remember even what we wish we could forget. That boy is still screaming across the centuries. The question is not if we can hear him. The question is if we are listening. Do we see the same patterns appearing again in new forms? Do we recognize the next Pepi before another 50,000 children vanish into modern chambers of power? History does not repeat, but it rhymes. And the rhyme of Pepi II, the rhythm of procurement and suffering, the beat of power feeding on innocence, that rhyme still goes on. We just call it different names now. We dress it in new rituals. We dismiss it as theory instead of fact. But the bones remember, the numbers remember, the shadows remember. And sometimes, in the silence between heartbeats, if you listen closely, you can still hear them. 50,000 children screaming in honey-covered agony, warning us that monsters are not born, they are made. That evil is not natural but built, that any nation is only 94 years of unchecked power away from becoming ancient Egypt under Pepi II. The pharaoh is gone. His victims are dust. But the pattern lives, waiting for the next time power, desire, and time align, waiting to build new chambers, waiting to find new victims, waiting to prove again that humans with godlike power will commit godlike atrocities. Unless we remember, unless we listen, unless we learn that some hungers must never be fed, some power must never be absolute, some reigns must never last 94 years. The honey-covered boy from 2200 BC died for many reasons, but perhaps he can serve one purpose: to remind us that civilization is always only one monster away from collapse. And that monster is never born. He is always made. And we are the ones who make him.